Hey everyone, welcome to the Tom's Hardware Podcast for February 22nd, 2022. As always, I'm Tom's Hardware Editor-in-Chief, Avram Pilch. I'm joined by Associate Editor Les Pounder, Raspberry Pi expert Ash Hill, and two very special guests from Raspberry Pi Education, Martin O'Hanlon and James Robinson. Hi guys, how are you doing?
Hi, it's really nice to be here. Thank you for inviting us.
So as
Really. Sorry, I'm really looking forward to talking about education and Raspberry Pi.
Fantastic. So, as we all know, the 10th anniversary of Raspberry Pi is coming up just next week. We are going to have a special Monday show with Evan, with the two founders of Raspberry Pi. In fact, ta-da, Pete Lomas and Evan Upton. So, but this week we're talking about Raspberry Pi's role in education, and of course, taking viewer questions live. So, starting with Martin, how do you guys get involved with Raspberry Pi education, and what is your role in it now?
Wow. Okay. So I'm going to perhaps rewind a little bit. I've worked for the Raspberry Pi Foundation as a sort of full-time employee for about 4 years. Prior to that, I used to describe myself as the hired help, whereby I would turn up and help run events, particularly our Picademy teacher training program. So I suppose I've had a sort of like on-off working relationship with the foundation for about six or 7 years, something like that. What I do now is I work in our educator support team, and my role is predominantly delivering training or online training for teachers. That makes up the vast majority of what I do for the foundation. And we have, I'm trying to remember my numbers. I think we have 37 online courses, plus a few others sort of dotted about, teaching whole range of subjects, from physical computing with a Raspberry Pi and using Python, to an introduction to AI and machine learning. Yeah. It's been a great few years, and it's a job that I really enjoy.
James, how about you?
I mean, yeah, similar reflections to Martin. I think I worked out, Martin, that it's my 7-year anniversary tomorrow at the foundation. So my background is an educator, as a teacher in the classroom, and I joined the team 7 years ago, whatever year that is, I've lost track. And one of the very first things that we were doing at the foundation, as Martin said, was this program called Picademy, which was a program we started in the UK, and we expanded that into North America. And that program was really to work with educators to really kind of build their confidence and their enthusiasm, and develop some sort of advocacy and some networks of teachers. And those teachers have gone on to have some really great, really great work out in the community. It's taken a long time to see that impact take place in the classroom, but they've gone on to sort of bring that confidence and help develop other educators around them. And then more recently, we've taken a more sort of active role in sort of supporting formal educators in sort of upskilling and developing their practice. And we've kind of been part of this massive program of work here in the UK, particularly in England, supporting teachers, as Martin says, with the training materials, but also with content for the classroom. So my role is around supporting teachers understand the best ways to teach computing concepts, something what teachers will often refer to as their sort of pedagogy, the sort of how to teach things in the classroom. And along with sort of colleagues of mine, we put out content that not only provides teachers with lessons that they can deliver, but also content around how to best deliver that content in the classroom. So yeah, it's been a really exciting ride. It's never a dull moment at the foundation, and I think we've got some really exciting plans going forward as well. Martin. Oh, well, sorry, back to you, everyone.
Great. So, as always, I just want to remind our audience that we're taking your questions live. Les, I know you had a question though.
I have, yeah. Because it's 10th anniversary of the Pi, I want to go back in time to the early days of the education team. I want to know how it all came together, because it sort of seems like you've always existed in some way, but we don't actually know much about what you do, how you do it, and how you all came together. It's like, the band story. Tell us how the band got together.
I mean, should I start on that, Martin? I don't know.
Yes, please. That would be nice.
Yeah, I mean, it probably started. I think Carrie Ann was one of the first sort of employees of the foundation, and let's see, Carrie Ann Philbin, and she, I think, came up with the idea of Picademy and kind of pitched it and ran the first few of them. And I think I was on the second cohort and carried on teaching in school, and shortly after that, joined the foundation and kind of picked up some responsibility for delivering Picademy going forwards. And at the time, we were a small group of, this is probably back in sort of 2014. This is a small group of about sort of 5 of us in the education team, kind of working on a mixture of supporting teachers directly in the classroom, but also developing projects that students and learners could do independently. And you'll find lots of those projects on the Raspberry Pi project site. And then gradually over the last 5 years, it feels like every so often we just have a big influx of people and we kind of grow. And the first big kind of milestone, I think, was our merger with Code Club, where we brought on lots of experienced people from the Code Club organization, and then later with Coder Dojo, and then more recently, as I mentioned, this work that we've been doing through the consortium in the UK has meant that we've been able to bring on lots of really experienced teachers to help us really write some world-class content to support educators. So that's the kind of the nutshell version, the quick tour. I don't know if there's any color or detail that Martin wants to add to that.
I think there's if we look at education within the Raspberry Pi Foundation, and in terms of how we've developed and how we've grown, started relatively small in supporting teachers in order to be able to use a Raspberry Pi device in the classroom, and then alongside that providing learning materials or learning projects for young people. Yeah, so as kind of James mentioned, through Code Club and Coder Dojo, and it's been in the past 3 or 4 years, something like that, where we've moved from providing support around our own product, so the Raspberry Pi product, and support for informal education in terms of code clubs and Coder Dojos to more formal education. And our formal education offering has been through the National Centre for Computing Education, which kind of James has referenced a couple of times. And with each one of those sort of evolutionary steps, you asked about the band. The band's quite a big band now. There's a lot of us. We deliver a huge amount of educational content. So even our Teach Computing curriculum, which is a complete curriculum from years 1 to all the way through secondary school, is delivered by us. And then there's Isaac Computer Science as well, which is a project between the Raspberry Pi Foundation and the University of Cambridge, which is for 16 to 18-year-olds. We're a big band now, but we're also having having a pretty significant impact as well. Yeah.
And there's definitely different sort of sections to the band right now. We used to be one education team, and now we have a team that focuses on formal education, a team that focuses on informal education, a team that's very focused on research and kind of pushing what we understand about teaching and learning forward, and then bringing that into our practice. And so, yes, it's multiple teams now. It's a very big band.
Yeah,
you guys,
James. Sorry, Ash. I was just going to say, James, I forgot to mention research, and it's always that thing. What's the thing I've left off my list? Right, and it was research.
Between us, we'll cover everything.
We'll fill it.
Yeah.
So between the two of you guys covering all these different areas of education, what are some of the biggest challenges that newcomers face when they're learning how to use the Raspberry Pi for the first time?
So, I mean, it's a great question, and I suppose if we're talking about the kind of Raspberry Pi device, I'm going to assume you're talking about the computer rather than the sort of Pico. I think the big challenge is interestingly, it comes from a space of, hang on, this is a computer, and how do I get over that first hurdle of making this fairly unique looking piece of green circuit board work, right? And I think if we look at the Raspberry Pi product development, I think the software changes that have been made have made a massive impact. The Raspberry Pi Imager was probably the biggest thing. So certainly from my perspective, that made it easy for new people to get started. If you didn't have an SD card that was already imaged, it was quite hard to kind of get past that first step.
Yeah.
And I always talk about, those sort of like initial barriers and those like initial, and you see them in all sorts of learning experiences. What's that thing that's going to trip somebody up right at the start before they've had like a little eureka moment that's just going to mean, oh, do you know, that's a bit hard. And we see those all of the time.
And they get in the way of confidence building, right, Martin, which I think is one of the things that we see with learners and with educators alike, is that building confidence and providing a sort of a scaffolded journey where you have an easy win, and then you kind of build upon that, and you develop your confidence, your independence, and your agency as you're learning, whether that be with the Raspberry Pi or any other kind of computing system. I think, that's a really important factor to kind of get right, to get people to be confident and passionate and to enjoy the learning experience that they're going through. And I think, that's something that I think we've been particularly good at with we have this sort of sense of fun within the content that we produce, I think, which helps alleviate some of those challenges.
So I was going to ask, how is the feedback loop between Raspberry Pi education and product development? Do you guys get like a sneak peek at what new products or software coming down the line, and do you give feedback on them and say, like, this is really important for education, or don't do this, this would be difficult for students?
It's a trap, Martin. We're being drawn into...
No, I'm not asking about future stuff. But like,
being reeled in somewhere.
Just mention a number greater than 4 and less than 6, and we're good. Okay.
I mean, like before the Pico came out, did you guys get a chance to play with it and to give some feedback on that?
Yes, I'm trying to find the one that I was given because it's a slightly different color to the other Raspberry Pi Picos. I can't find it. It's in here somewhere. But yes, certainly, as part of, I don't speak for Raspberry Pi trading in terms of, product development, but, as part of any of our product releases, we as the foundation do get to see what's happening, and we have feedback, and quite often we write resources to support those products as well. And that was the same for the Pico. It's the same for the Pi 4 before that. And one of the things that I'm quite proud of is the work that we do to introduce physical computing into the classroom. Genuinely believe that physical computing is like, I think it's a shame Carrie-Anne's not here, and I'm going to quote her. I'm definitely going to misquote it, but what she says, it's like the physical computing to computing is like the sort of blowing things up in chemistry, right? It's the fun bit. I feel she's going to say I've terribly misquoted it, but it's along those lines. Yeah.
And I think it really... Oh, sorry, go on.
I was just going to agree and say you've got to plug in the servo and blow something up yourself and see the smoke to know you're really working with hardware.
I was just going to sort of give a little bit of I think it's like Martin and I have both been involved in. That's the BlueDot work, Martin, which I think is probably a good example of where we as the foundation, people working in the education team, but also trading, have been able to collaborate and produce something where we've kind of been really focused on the user experience. And for those that aren't familiar, the BlueDot is a product which we shared. When was that, Martin? Early this year?
No, I'd say mid last year.
Oh, mid last year. Time just means nothing to me. Anyway, so the BlueDot is a device that you can, or a hat that you can put on top of the Raspberry Pi that allows you to integrate with Lego kind of hardware. And this was something that we'd been working on for a good year, if not a bit more. Developing
longer than that, James.
Yeah. Again, time, but so working with the trading team, but also with Lego to sort of develop some learning experiences for young people, and really kind of think about what that product, that device, that bit of kit added to the ecosystem and enabled students to learn us to be able to do was a really interesting experience for all of us. And we had, I'm really proud of the projects that we came up with in the end, and I think the reaction that we've seen from learners.
Yeah. Well, it was 2 years ago that we were all in London for that Lego day. Do you remember? We were all hacking around with the
yes,
what are they called now? Spike kits. That's the word. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty much second anniversary.
It's been a long time coming, and obviously the pandemic didn't sort of help with any of that. But I think it's a good example of where we've been able to really kind of have some direct interaction with that product development cycle and bringing it to an educational market.
Yeah, but to be fair, the pandemic did actually impact the design of Build Hat a little bit, because you moved from an STM32 to an RP2040 inside it.
Yeah. It was I can't think at what point that change happened, but yeah, I think partly down to just the launch of the RP2040 coincided with a shortage of the other chip that I forgot the name of, Les, but it's fine.
STM32, yeah.
I know I can always rely on you to quote chip numbers, but yeah. So I think it coincided, and so it seemed like a really sensible decision, and it worked out really well in the end.
Yeah, definitely a great product.
So, Ash, you had a question, right?
Yeah, there we go. I was muted. I had a question for you guys. Following up on, I know that there are different areas that the team creates content for regarding like educators versus newcomer students, more informal environments. So this is more pertaining to educators as far as like teachers in a more professional environment. I want to know, would you guys recommend any supplemental study to any teachers working with the Raspberry Pi?
I mean, yes.
I guess like more specifically, like obviously it's going to help to know some Python, but like what kind of things would you recommend teachers get into to kind of help them teach the Raspberry Pi and grasp it?
I think, if I'm going to look at, if I can wider that for just a moment to talk about physical computing rather than specifically the Raspberry Pi, and then we'll kind of we'll talk about that. Now, obviously, I'm going to plug our own resources, and because why not? If I'm looking at teachers and in terms of like CPD, I said right at the start, my kind of bag at Raspberry Pi is online learning. We have some fabulous online courses that are specifically around teaching physical computing with Raspberry Pi and Python. If we've also got a really nice series of sort of like introduction to programming courses. They start programming programming 101, 102, and 103. And they are a really great way to sort of round your experience in programming, as the sort of one part of physical computing, and also the electronic side of it, but also the project side of it and the making side of it. And actually that's a kind of big part. The doing and the sharing is a big part of how we build our educational resources. So supplementary stuff, take one of our online courses. They're great. There's a really nice one on getting started with your Raspberry Pi that will get you over those little humps that we talked about, like imaging your SD card and how to use it and what the desktop looks like. And then there's a great one on teaching Raspberry Pi with teaching physical computing with Raspberry Pi and Python.
And if I can add a few of my own shameless plugs, I will do. But no, I think one of the really important things for educators is, you've got two sides. You've got thinking about your own individual personal skill and how you understand computing and the challenges, but also then how you disseminate that and work with your students. And a really important factor there is community and connecting with other educators. So one of the ways, and this is my shameless plug, that we do that at the foundation is through a publication which isn't going to show up very well in my little virtual background here, called Hello World, which is a magazine that we publish 3 times a year, and it's full of teacher stories. It's full of research articles. It's full of lots of ideas to inspire you, not only to have projects that you can learn for yourself, but also things to take into the classroom. And so that's something which is a free subscription magazine and available all over the world. And my follow-up plug to that, I'm shameless, is that we have this book which we published recently, which is a compendium publication of all the articles from that work that focus on how to teach things. There's a really nice framework in here about how teachers can build their kind of the practice. And one of those principles is around physical computing. And there's also a podcast as well that comes alongside Hello World, which you can find at helloworld.cc.
A podcast? Who would listen to that?
I know, right?
About the Raspberry Pi?
Yeah. So I wanted to ask, how do you typically work with educators? Is it primarily that they go and avail themselves of the online resources that you have and of those printed resources, or do you also go and directly consult with schools or teachers?
I'd say a bit of both. I think far more of our work, particularly in the UK, has moved more sort of online and slightly more remote from our educators through the online, learning courses. And I think that's partly, a necessity of scaling up to reach more teachers and to have a bigger impact. But then we also work closely with educators. So through the National Centre programme that Martin mentioned that we're a part of, we consult with a group of teachers on a regular basis to kind of check our assumptions, to run ideas past them, to get their feedback. And obviously that, we also, our plans pre-pandemic were to spend a lot more time in classrooms working with teachers. And I think now that we start to emerge from that situation, I think we're really looking forward to be able to spend a bit more time looking at how educators are implementing things in their classroom and making sure that our understanding of what life is like in the classroom or in an educational setting is correct.
And I think, James, as well, our research work is predominantly, research around how can we support teachers? What are effective teaching practices, for teachers, and we do that by working with educators.
Yeah, I'm going to mention on just from research, because you've mentioned that, Martin. I think the research team is currently undertaking one of the largest scale research interventions with teachers in the classroom to really understand how we can better encourage girls, particularly, to take more active roles in computing, and looking at the different sort of practices and pedagogies that teachers can use. And that's going to have massive. It's going to bear massive fruit for the educator community. It's one of the biggest programs of its kind.
Interesting. Well, I've got a question for you both now, lads. This is something I'm going to ask you to go back in your head, back in time. Each of you tell me, what was your one favourite project from a Picademy that a teacher's made? Something completely off the wall, crazy, that really shouldn't exist, but they did it and they wowed you. So, Martin, do you want to go first? Because you're looking to the sky for inspiration.
Oh, come on, mate. I mean, it's like
you've got to give us some thinking time. There's so many.
Right. So I'm gonna talk for a bit, and maybe that will give me time to think about things. So I'd say one of the things that I enjoyed, and Les, you had experience of delivering Picademy as well, was we used to run a really short session where we would essentially give people a motor, a wheel, maybe two motors, and a motor control and the way of moving it. And then we would say, okay, here's a load of craft materials, make something out of a motor that spins round. Yeah. And what I really enjoyed about that was the variety of crazy stuff that came out. And I think the reason that I enjoyed that was twofold. I think first of all, it's kind of like really important that we have opportunities to be creative with technology. I really struggle with that idea that technology and particularly programming is a one-track solution, as in, i.e., everything's got the kind of perfect solution. I really struggle with that idea, and I think anything that allows us to be creative with technology allows us to be able to explore that. So I love the fact that you give somebody a wheel and a load of craft materials, and they made something silly. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. And so wheels that dragged up bits of string and pulled, I don't know, like R2D2 up, or things that spun round and flicked bits of cotton wool everywhere. The things that I really enjoyed. I think, you know, if I'm looking back to like the final project, you know, what was the thing that I suppose wowed me? It was some of them whereby I found myself thinking, that's ambitious. and you know, I'm sat there thinking, I'm not sure how I would do. I mean, like, how is that going to work? So I liked the ones that were ambitious, and they didn't always have to be successful, because generally what happened was they had this fabulous idea. And I remember somebody wanted to create like a light wand with a sense hat that waved about and made pretty patterns and things like that. And it was the evolution of that idea of like, oh, well, hang on, if I could wave it about, maybe I could like test how fast it's going. Maybe I can then make a game out of it. Yeah. So it was the evolution of those ideas rather than that kind of like one thing that somebody wanted to do that I always found really inspiring.
Awesome.
Now that Martin has kind of given me enough time to think, thank you, Martin. I think actually I'm gonna largely echo what Martin said in many ways, in that a lot of the projects that really motivated me and inspired me when I was supporting educators was those where they were ambitious and they were challenging, and you really had to sort of scratch your head and think about how you would achieve some of those things. And I think, you know, one of the things that we sort of saw over the time period that we ran Picademy was the evolution of the software. And so, you know, I'm thinking back to a project that was prior to a time where Sonic Pi, for example, could talk to physical computing components or do sort of synchronization. Yeah. And so we had a project where someone wanted to light up some LEDs in time with some music, and we had no way of making those two processes communicate. And so what we did realize is that both of them could talk to Minecraft. And so we ended up creating an inter-process communication like interface, but in Minecraft, so that Sonic Pi would place a block and Python would watch for that block. And when that block appeared, it would then light an LED. And so we were having to really like fudge something and create a really bodged kind of solution, but in doing so we were actually kind of exploring some really interesting kind of properties or sort of aspects of computer science, you know, and really kind of stretching the boundaries of what we could do with the kit and the software and the libraries that we had at our disposal.
Wow, compatibility is really just limited by our own creativity.
Yeah,
that's nuts. I want to take things back a little bit and ask you guys specifically about your experience with older educators and younger makers, students, right? I want to know, in what ways does the process differ in teaching children versus adults when it comes to the Raspberry Pi?
Oh, James, I'm going to leave this absolutely with you. This feels like your bag.
I mean, I think the processes, the sort of the challenges that you face, or the kind of the journey you might take them on, is probably fairly similar. I think maybe the challenges are slightly different in that we often find I think with younger learners, they're probably more willing to kind of give things a go and fail. But maybe, you know, once they do fail, I think with younger learners, you've got to support them with their resilience. So they're happy to try, but maybe once they've failed, you might need to kind of support them to kind of develop that resilience. I think sometimes with adults, what I see is sort of the opposite. They can be quite resilient, but they can be quite resistant to start that journey. And so it's obviously every person's slightly different. But I think with adults who maybe, you know, feel that they're not part of that sort of digital world, they don't have the confidence, the skills to be able to say, well, actually, I'm going to give it a go, or I feel confident. One of the things that really sort of frustrates me, and you kind of hear this from adults quite often, is like, oh, I'm no good with computers, or I can't do X, Y, Z with computers. And I think that's a really poor role model that we're kind of, demonstrating to learners. We wouldn't say, oh, reading, that's not for me. Oh, maths, that's not for you. You wouldn't model that kind of attitude towards other disciplines. And so I think it's really imperative on us as adults. I've kind of got off the topic of the question here. Sorry, Ash.
No,
but I think it's really important for us as adults to be open to those new learning experiences. And I think that's probably one of the challenges that we see with adults. Would you agree with that, Martin? Have I just completely made that up?
No, I think that's a really nice summary. I think you described the process as being the same. I think it is the same. It's just the motivations are different, and we need to recognise that. Yeah, and quite often, certainly from my perspective, a lot of what I do is education for adults, and things that we would do for very young children are just as relevant.
That's really cool.
Yeah, no question. I find that as a parent, first of all, I mean, even before I became a parent, it was always great to just learn new things and the challenges of learning new things technically. Now that I also get to see them through the eyes of my children, it's like, okay, how can they conceive of this and understand it? How can I approach it from their perspective? Although I'm always amazed at how easy it is for kids to pick up on technical concepts. It's easier for them than it is for us. I mean, my daughter just turned 3, and like using tablets, using electronics, no problem for her whatsoever. I think she'll be programming by like 3.5. But
not even in Scratch.
Yeah, but plugging in the USB cable the right side up is
on the first try.
Is on question. Oh, James, you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just something that really occurred to me while we were just talking there. I think one of the really important things for all learners is context, right? And that's the thing that makes one of the biggest differences as well, is that, and we've been thinking about this a lot recently as we adapt content for different kind of audiences, is actually the content, the learning, the fundamentals stay the same, but the context through which you present that content is one of the things that helps motivate learners regardless of their background and their age. And what we as educators, whatever our kind of background, whatever our kind of role, whether we are giving a talk somewhere or we're in a classroom setting, I think you have to make the context of the learning relevant to the learners that you're presented with. And I think that's fundamentally, I think, a really important thing.
Yeah, no question. What appeals to my son, like learning how to do something that would affect Minecraft, would not nearly as well appeal to someone my age who might not be playing Minecraft, but you might tell us, hey, this would help you with your job. Oh, great. Anyway, I want to thank our special guests, James and Martin, and of course, all of you who watch and listen. We are going to have a very special episode at a different time than usual next week, which will be Monday instead of Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. GMT instead of 7:30 p.m. GMT, 2:30 p.m. Eastern, where we will have Pete Lomas and Evan Upton to talk about the Raspberry Pi 10th anniversary on what is functionally the Raspberry Pi 10th anniversary. It was February 29th, so this is the official, I guess, 10th anniversary day. So thanks to everyone. We will see you all then, and hope you have a great week. Bye, everyone.